a candidate interview guide today. And I've built out a template for you all to follow along here. This is AirOps. If you haven't used AirOps before, you can go over to the templates on the left-hand side here. Then just scroll down to the general section and click on the candidate interview guide. So what I will say is that this current template is something that we're actually going to improve on today. So, after this session, there will be an update here and a better, version that we want to use. But for now, you can go ahead to test along with me, use this template here, and we'll make some modifications. So today, what we're really going to do is we're going to take a candidate's information, including their name, LinkedIn URL, optionally the resume, along with the job description that you provide, the job position that you're hiring for. And then we're going to enrich that information in order to give us a really quick rundown of what someone really wants to know when they're interviewing. So you can kind of imagine, hey, you're on an interview panel, you don't have a whole lot of time to understand, who this person is or, the specific requirements about the role. What this will do is basically give you the quick rundown about the person, as well as what you should really look out for in regards to the role. So when it comes to the workflow itself, what we're going to be going through today is the LinkedIn step. So we're going to fetch information from, given a LinkedIn URL, we're going to get the information about the member. We're also going to enhance the workflow with information about the company. And then we're going to actually generate that report, given a couple of LLM steps. And finally, we're going to combine that output, and then we're going to push that to Notion. So what I will say is the Notion integration is optional, but it is a very easy integration to add here. And so what you saw in the Notion itself is something that can be easily integrated and generated. So a quick overview of how to begin thinking about this workflow when you get started. First of all, you really start with the inputs. So what you want to think about is, what information do I have off the shelf? What information can I provide to the LLM to help it understand the context of what I'm trying to achieve? Also, by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them out as I'm talking, and I'll definitely answer along. So basically, context is king here. We want to provide as much context as possible to the model so that it can best generate that output for us. So here's the start step, and this is where we're going to get started. In the start step, we're going to take a quick look at all the information that I kind of highlighted before. You have these groups here. You first have the candidate information. And to take a look at what this actually looks like in the user interface, what you want to do is click Test All. So here we go. We can see the actual, user interface that a user will see by clicking Test All. What we've done here is set up a group called Candidate Info. And within this, we have the inputs name, LinkedIn URL, and then optionally a resume. So this does require a LinkedIn URL. If the user doesn't have one, that's totally fine. You can modify this to your needs and just pass the resume. What you would need to do here is make sure that, this could also be optional, but for our purpose today, we're going to make this input required. So I'm kind of speaking as if you've already set up some inputs yourself. To actually set them up, you would click that edit button and you would go here to the input type. These define, the type of input that you're going to pass to AirOps. Short text here is just this one text box. And then long text here is this longer text box. And those are the only fields that we're going to be using today. So short text and long text. And you can also label your inputs as well as the variable name, which will be generated by default, as well as provide a hint here, which will help the user understand what they should pass. So this is how you would set up your inputs. Again, we have the candidate information. We just need the name, the LinkedIn URL. And then we have the job info here. And we're going to just pass company name as well as job position and the job rec. So these are going to be the required fields. We want to know, okay, what's the company that you work at, the job position that you're hiring for, as well as the job rec or job description. And then if you're a user, this is a field that you could use to explicitly state what you're specifically looking for or trying to evaluate. I think this helps add some customization, as well as lets the model know like what exactly you're trying to evaluate. So these are our inputs here. And to get started, the best way to jump in is also to add inputs. Yep.
There seems to be a question in the chat.
Is there a question?
In the chat, yes. Based on the prompts, it seems like the inputs do not have any data or definitions. They'll need to be defined in the LLM steps each time, correct?
Based on the prompts, yes, that's correct. So basically, the inputs here are passed to the LLM dynamically. So what you're doing when you're setting up your start step is that you're creating inputs that become variables, and these variables are accessed in the LLM step. So when you create this input, what will happen is a variable is created, and then you can reference that variable in your step so that whenever a person types in information into your app, that dynamic information is passed along to the LLM step. Now, if you wanted to basically provide a default value, for example, which is, okay, if it's empty and it's, for example, resume here is optional. Let's take a look at resume. And we don't want to do a default value because there is really no default for a person's resume. But as an example here, this, resume is optional. However, if you wanted to provide a default value for a blank input, that's what this default value would be. If something is empty, this is going to pass the default value if you type something in here. So that's one way you would basically kind of default the user to a value if they haven't provided it. However, we're assuming that the user is going to pass in their information, and we're going to pass along the information they type in through these inputs, which become variables. Does that answer the question? Let me know if you still have any questions about specifically defining the inputs, but the inputs help you create variables which you will pass to the LLM step. So they are dynamic. All right, so given our input fields, we are then going to go along to enrich the information that is provided. So one of the most powerful parts about AirOps is that you can enrich information given additional data providers. And we've made that really easy for you here by adding a utility step. So, utility steps are basically types of steps that you can use to perform a wide range of functions that help, grab data from, the web or from special data providers. And in this instance, we have a step here called LinkedIn member fetch. So this is basically going to give you the scraped data from LinkedIn in a structured format. What's helpful about this is, one, LinkedIn is very private with their data, so it's almost impossible to use the web scrape step right now to scrape a LinkedIn profile. So it's better to use this LinkedIn member fetch. I will say that, this data is updated probably on a monthly cadence, and so it may not be exactly real time. However, it's much more, it's much more robust than what you're going to get from web scraping yourself. So we're going to use this LinkedIn member fetch step here. And what we just need to do is pass in the input here, which is the LinkedIn URL. I'm going to go ahead and pass in some inputs into the start step. So as you're building, the best thing to do is to test as you build. That helps you understand, okay, what is going to happen when I run this step? And testing one step is much more efficient than having to test a string of steps that you may, that may or may not work yet. So as you go along, it's best to test steps individually to make sure that each one actually works. So you can actually test the start step by passing in inputs here. Click on this little play button to test the step. And what we're going to do is drop in some information. Vency has been really gracious in allowing us to use her information here. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in some of that information. And if you're testing along, this is, the best way to test because it preserves that information and you don't need to go back and grab it later. So give me one moment. AirOps. Then we're going to pass the job rec. I'm going to grab it from this workflow that I've already started working on. For convenience. There's the job rec. And what I'm looking for this is just, pulling some information, that you would want if you were interviewing. So experience working with large language models. And then we save this. So now when we click test the step, our inputs are saved. Great way to not have to rerun inputs. Okay. So now that we have our inputs actually passed as an example, we're going to test this step, the LinkedIn step specifically. And what you'll see here is it's going to take that LinkedIn URL that I put into the start step, and it's going to run this step and give me a lot of information about Vency, which is great. I will say it does not provide recent posts. We've had some asks about, can it provide, posts that the person has actually made at this current point in time. We don't have that information, but it has basically everything else about the profile. So we're going to take this profile. Oops, something went wrong here. Do a quick refresh. Let's see. So this step should still be good to go. What we want to use this for is to just enhance, and grab some more company information for the LLM. This is actually optional, I will say. The next step here that we're going to do is say, okay, given their experience, let's get additional company information about the three most recent experiences that they've had, in case that the LM or the company that they're working for is really not obvious. But I will say that it's really optional here to do that. It's you don't have to enhance the company information further if you don't want to, but this is just to show you what's possible with what you have. So if we go down here, you'll see that there's something called member experience collection. And what we're looking at here is basically a structured format of data called JSON. And we use JSON a lot here at AirOps to structure that data in a way that we can easily access and pass information from step to step. So there is data here called member experience collection. We see the three most recent experiences that Vency's had. It comes with information like the title, like basically everything you see in LinkedIn, that little experience section, that's what's going to be here. But you can kind of see that the only thing about the company is the name as well as the URL. I will say that GPT-4 Turbo is more updated in its knowledge. So presumably it should understand some of these larger companies. And so you may or may not want to pass this information. But for this case, what we're going to do is basically iterate over these three most recent experiences to grab more information about the company. And how I do that here is through something called our iteration step. So if you haven't used an iteration step before, what it does is it's going to perform the same step within the step for over multiple elements. We have a question here. Do we have any limits on LinkedIn API? Not for the steps specifically. Each of them does have a different number of tasks they cost. So let's take a look. This LinkedIn step costs 3 tasks versus, like, for example, a code step would cost 1. However, I don't believe that there is a limit on the specific step itself. So on the iteration step, what we're doing is we're going to take a list of elements and we're going to perform the same action over that list of elements. Now, how do you know what to pass into the iteration step? It's a little bit tricky, but again, like I mentioned, you're going to use a data structure called a list. A list is something that begins and ends with brackets, square brackets, and then within that list, you're going to have elements. So I'm going to show you really quickly here what that will look like, because what I've done here is I've made it kind of easy for you to see that I've already stripped out this list. But what this looks like is square brackets. If you can take a look at member experience collection here, you'll see square brackets and they go all the way down. There's a lot of experience that Bensi has, so it doesn't end for a while. Let's take a quick look. All right, it ends all the way down here. So if you see, that's a list. And within this list, we have elements. Each element is actually an object. And so if you take a look, each of these objects, JSON objects, is an element in this list. So what we're doing here is you could actually pass in member experience collection, directly here, step1.member experience collection. And this would give you the entire list of experience. What we're doing is just saying, okay, I just want the top 3 because recency really does matter in an interview. So the way that you pass this is, 1, you're going to take this step name, and right now we don't have the ability to actually name your steps, something customizable. So unfortunately, right now it's just called step1.output. So step1.output, this is going to give us this big object. And the way you're going to get that member experience collection is by indexing with this period here. So if you see period, member experience collection, that's going to give us this long list. And like we said, we don't want the entire list. So what we're going to do is we're going to slice it and get the first 3 elements. So what I will say that this syntax is actually JavaScript. So if you're trying to figure out, oh, I don't exactly know how to grab this list, what I would do and recommend is, ask ChatGPT, how do I use JavaScript to get a list from this object called step1.output? This is what the object, or this is what the list looks like. That's what I would do, because then ChatGPT sees your object and it says, oh, okay, this is what you need to do to first get, step1.output, then the member experience collection, and then the top 3 elements. So, the best way to solve for this, if you have never used JavaScript, is to ask ChatGPT for a little snippet. And what you'll see is it does a really great job. But again, this iteration input is just a list, and ultimately it looks something like this, something that begins and ends with brackets. It could be a list of numbers, it could be a list of objects, it could be a list of, strings, which are like words. So that's how you pass in the input. Let me know if you have any questions about how to pass in a list to the iteration step. Hopefully that simplifies it a little bit for you. So really what we've passed here is a list with these 3 objects here. And we're going to grab more company information with the LinkedIn company fetch step. And here we just need to pass the URL. And if you'll notice, the URL is provided here in the actual input. On the right-hand side, you'll see, okay, company URL, this is within the object. What we want to do is pass this piece of information into the LinkedIn company fetch step so we can get the company information. So what we're going to do is just, all you have to do is press step 3 to element here. And the question is, what is the element? The element is, each element that you've passed into the list. So when you're clicking step 3 to element, what it's really going to say is, give me the current element that you're iterating on. So that would just be one of these objects like this. Okay, so now we have the whole object. How do we get the actual URL? What you want to do is you want to index into the object. And again, the way that you get a key, these are keys on the left-hand side. The way that you get a key from an object is by just the same syntax that we did earlier, which is a period. So period, company, URL. And this will pass this company URL from the object that it's iterating over into the company fetch step. And so we can take a look. Not sure why it's continuing to do that. But let's go back here. We can take another look by running this step, and I can show you on the output here. Let's see. Yep. The iteration syntax is not liquid. However, so liquid syntax, get engineering to fix this one. Sorry, just going to run this one more time. So this is not liquid in that you don't have the two squiggly brackets on the outside. And so the only thing that you need is just step 1.output. All right, so we ran the company fetch step. And what you'll see is it's run the step within it, the iteration step 3 times. So step 3 is the iteration, and within it, it's run this company fetch step 3 times because we provided it a list of 3 elements. And it's done the fetch for each of the companies. So if you take a look here, we have Notion. There's a lot of information that it provides about companies. You should definitely take a look at the other step that we have for LinkedIn, which is a company search. So, provided a name or, provided a name, you can basically search for the companies that match. So here you can fetch the company and basically get all the updates, description, etc. What we're going to pass through, and I'll show you where we do this. We're going to do this with Liquid later, but we're going to just grab some of this information, such as the size, industry, description, just to help out the model understand, to help it understand, what company the person worked at. It's not mandatory again, but I think it does help with some context.
Cindy, can you show how you pass the company URL in the LinkedIn company fetch box within the iterator?
Yes. Yes. I'm not going to click save changes because that gave me an error, but so basically, yeah, so for every iteration step, let me go through this again. But for every iteration step, you have something called the element, and you have something called the element index. So the element is the actual element that you're passing, which we saw before. If we look here, go back, the actual element itself is a JSON object. So when you're passing element, that's going to give you that JSON object. When you pass the index, and this is actually not, we're not going to use the index here, but it's helpful in some cases. So the index is the number or the position within that list. So for example, and it starts from 0. So for example, in our list of 3, this first element has an element index of 0. This second position has an element index of 1. And then lastly, this third element that we have here has an element index of 2. So it starts from 0, but you basically get the position that it's in, and it's helpful because you can basically use this to index other objects that have the same position. So we can take a look at an example later at some point in time. But for this case, what we're doing is we're passing in that object and the actual company URL here, which is a specific key within that object. Should not have clicked save changes. I'm sorry. Okay. All right, so let's keep going. We're now going to take that information and we're going to create the actual report. So the bulk of kind of, the information fetching is done. Now what we're going to do is actually also a very hard thing, prompting. Okay, so prompting, and we actually have 3 steps here. There are ways to actually, do this all in one step, but there are trade-offs to why you would or wouldn't do it. So I'm just going to explain kind of my rationale right now for why I did 3 steps, but we can definitely take a look at, if you want to optimize the number of tokens, tasks, etc., like, use one step and try to like put it all in one. So first off, we're going to output something about the candidate. And here, if you haven't seen this LLM Studio before, there are a couple ways to help make your life easier. You could click generate with AI. I didn't actually do that here. However, if you have some sort of use case that's pretty quick that you want to test with, click generate with AI. Here, we're going to choose the model. I am choosing GPT-4 Turbo because one, cost, it has the best cost for the GPT-4 models, but also has a huge context window. So that's why we're using this today. I have noticed so far that there are some, let me take a quick look. Side note, playing around with template on AirOps before the Zoom. Since you use the element index, it doesn't always pick up the most recent job positions, which you would get by using the position profile. Ah, interesting. Okay. Yep. That's interesting. Okay. I thought it was in order. But I will take a look. So when 4 Turbo first appeared at AirOps, it required the OpenAI key to use, but now it does not. Is it already production ready? In the logs, I see it is using the preview model. Yeah, so the model itself is called preview. So, within the OpenAI docs, there's like, a dash preview, which is why it's called that, but it is ready to use. They have opened up capacity, so we are able to allow you guys to use it as well. But yeah, it's called a preview model, but it is ready to use, and it is working well. I will say that it is different in some capacity from GPT-4 and GPT-4 32K. It may not generate exactly, the same output as the other models, and there are times when there are quality trade-offs. So it looks like it may be, a little bit, less powerful than the other GPT-4 models, but it's still miles better than GPT 3.5. And so there's this cost context window trade-off, and I think it does a pretty good job. So that's why we're going to use it. But I will say GPT-4 and the 32K model, they do output a little bit better. So we're going to just choose Turbo here. And if you don't know what temperature is, that is basically kind of like the amount of variability you want in your response, like how creative can the output be. We're just kind of going to put that at 0.5 in the middle here. It can be a little creative, maybe not too creative. So we're going to close this. One moment on streaming. If you haven't seen what streaming is, basically it's going to show text in real time. So once we test this, it should show text as Chat GPT shows it, which is basically token by token. All right. So when looking here at the prompt, basically we're going to run through, the system as well as kind of the instructions that I provided to it. So there's a lot going on here. However, we'll break down first. The system is, we're going to tell it, who it is and its task. So the reason, this just requires a lot of experimentation. There's not a hard science to how to prompt the system, as well as, some of the messages. But, you know, the first thing in the system is, okay, we're going to tell it who it is. It's going to be an interview strategist. The reason strategist is kind of, it helps it understand like strategy. How should we approach the situation, or approach the interview? And then specifically the task, this task could be even more specific. Your task is to help the user understand everything they need to know about a candidate before interviewing them. Definitely a little bit less technical, more ambiguous. However, we do get more explicit about what it needs to do later. So use language and tone as if talking to a peer. Sometimes, you know, you can put the tone later. However, there are times, you know, you can put it in the system. Here, I just decided to put it in the system. Now, to get output that really, you know, generates quality, there are a couple things that I did, and you'll kind of see it in this progression here. Talking to it as if it's chat versus just versus your, you know, you being a taskmaster and it trying to accomplish your task. Talking to it, you know, in the form of a chat actually helps it kind of, you know, have this persona, which at times becomes more human-like and then generates better output. So there are times when you can say, okay, I want you to do X, Y, Z and don't deviate. But then there are other times where you want it to actually think. And in that case, it's more helpful to kind of talk to it as if it's chat. So understand here that even when you're prompting, you're actually talking to like a chat model, and you want it to help you with your task. And so you kind of have to help it understand that it's in a conversation, not just trying to output structured information. So that's kind of why I say, okay, I'd like you to help me understand, because we're like talking to it. I'd like you to help me understand if a job candidate is the right fit for the position. This is providing context, by the way. You know, the first thing that I do is provide context so that it understands what its task is. So help me understand, you know, if they're the right fit for the position. This is job position. And again, this is liquid. And if you remember, we defined our variables in the start step. And so we're going to access those variables with liquid syntax here. There's a very easy way to do that, and that's through these pills. And so, you know, you don't have to remember how to do this, but all you have to do is just click on the pill and it will generate your liquid syntax. When you pass this here, what it's going to do is it's going to take your input. So for example, I passed in the start step, AirOps growth lead. What it's going to do is say, I'd like you to help me understand if a job candidate is the right fit for the position, AirOps growth lead at company name, which is AirOps. So it's going to replace these variables with your data that you pass through, because, you know, this basically accesses that variable. So for context, this is the job requisition. And then I do add, you know, an optionally, this is what I'm looking for in a candidate, which is looking for is, you know, basically the field that we had defined earlier, which looks like this, what I'm looking for. So all of this information that you're passing through in the test step, you are accessing in the LLM step. So that's the reason why we have these inputs and these variables, is for you to pass specific and customized information to the model. So that's not going to give you generic output. Then it says, this is information about the candidate I'm interviewing. We provide the name. If there's a resume, we provide a resume. This, you know, there's a lot of liquid syntax here, which we can go into more depth later. I'd like to cover, you know, a couple of other things instead, but for context, you know, everything that's happening here is liquid syntax. If you go to the docs in Shopify, they have all of this available to you, but it's just allowing us to customize some of the way that this is set up. So resume is optional, and I say, okay, if the resume is passed in, then we're going to actually show the resume. Then we're going to pass in the LinkedIn profile, title, all this information that we extracted in the first step. And then here in the experience, we say, okay, I want you to go through each of the companies and provide, you know, information about the actual experience. So there's a lot going on here. I basically extracted specific information from that first step. There's a reason why I didn't, I'm going to show you kind of one moment here. I'm going to show you in the logs here for convenience. There's a reason why I didn't pass in step 1.output by itself, because since we're talking in chat, sometimes it makes it easier to say, I'd want you to, for example, this is the name, the resume, etc. But I don't want to pass in everything. There's just an overload of information. I personally think it's, more helpful to narrow down what you pass so that there's less noise. So I chose the fields that I wanted to pass, and then I, used a little bit of liquid to actually get those fields. Again, we can go into how to do this later, but basically you can index into every single field here from a previous step, and you can choose specifically, given a structured object like JSON, you can choose exactly what you want to pass to it. So I'm not going to give it more info than kind of like, the most recent experience.
Cindy, there's a question about the model. So do you have a clear preference for GPT-4 Turbo versus Cloud 2.1?
I actually haven't used Claude 2 extensively for content generation yet. Claude I've used a lot more for like extraction, because, for the longest time it's been the model that had the longest, the largest context window. I would have to go back and check, how it actually generates text to see whether or not that analytical, or reasoning capabilities is equivalent. However, so far, just in general, I do prefer GPT-4. But I will say, given some of the trade-offs that we're seeing with Turbo, I would have to do some experimentation to see. All right, so we're gonna just keep going, roll through some of this prompting and show you again, the way to actually provide information to the model is by, specifically telling it the pieces of data that you want to pass. And again, there are some liquid syntax involved. There are, this, for example, is a for loop, and we're just going to go through the previous companies to provide that information that we, grabbed from the company information. And then we also show the skills at the bottom. So we skipped some of the information that it provided, the original, LinkedIn data provided, because it's just long, but you can feel free to modify, change, add whatever you want to your need. So then the last kind of step here that I have, so I provide a bunch of context, all of the information about the candidate, the role, etc. And in the final kind of user message, I'm basically giving it the instruction. So I say, as of talking to a peer who doesn't have any context about the candidate's companies, give me an overview of their profile in this format, then give me an easy to understand list of their most recent roles, etc. And so this is going to give, kind of like an overview of who the person is. And the reason why I just say the format is because without this, you're going to get many different formats with Turbo. It's going to come out, any type of way. And so if you want it a very structured format, just tell it, okay, here's how I want you to output the information. Usually it does a really good job of being able to follow this instruction. So this is about the candidate, and the way that I would go about doing testing is just by clicking test here, and then you can kind of see it streamed. This is the streaming feature I mentioned earlier. As you can see, it does do a pretty good job of, one, not giving me additional chat beforehand. It's starting with overview. So I'm not going to, let me just actually let this finish, because it is a step that I need to run to test future steps. But any questions on how to set up like a prompt here? All right. Great. So love my elaboration on what turbo trade-offs. Turbo trade-offs I will say that I think turbo, it's a matter of like the small nuances in the quality. We could even just like take a look here and see if there's a difference. What I would do is just actually test them side by side to kind of see. And you'll kind of notice that some of the language at times with turbo becomes like it's just not as robust or not as solid. I will say that this is probably equivalent. But it's mostly a quality question in terms of and also like sometimes accuracy in terms of your instructions. For example, GPT-4 really does understand, okay, like, you know, formatting instructions. Turbo might have some chat beforehand, which you have to get rid of. So instead of just outputting the format that you want, it'll add some chat text before that. So that's another thing. I'm going to keep going to the key considerations here. We're going to run this just to see what it looks like. And I'm going to show you the things that we would change to make this better. And then two, how to actually like make this prompt, you know, more customized. Let me know if you have any questions hearing me.
There is a question about the LinkedIn Fetch profile tool. It's in the chat.
Can you repeat it to me? I can't see the previous chat.
Yeah, sure. I have a question about LinkedIn Fetch profile tool. It worked for every profile I tested, but for my own profile, it always returns an empty string.
I would ask, is your profile new or two, like private? I'm not sure. I think there might be variable like types of responses just given privacy. And so if it's private, that might be a reason. Okay. Any other questions? I'm gonna keep going.
Are you using the LinkedIn API or something else?
We are using something else. We're using a third party data service provider. So I don't think, you know, the LinkedIn API would, you know, allow access to everyone's kind of information like that. So third party data service provider. Cool. Anything else?
That's about it.
Okay, awesome. Great. So I'm going to just keep going with some of this, you know, the things that, you know, I'm showing here. Give me 1 second. Let's go to this app. So given kind of like the key considerations, what you'll see on the right-hand side is that 1 second to run it again.
Also, there was one other question.
The output is going to seem
resources for Liquid, which we'll share after this. We have a good resource for that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the actual like documentation is from Shopify. So there's a specific Shopify website that you'll go to see the documentation. So you'll see here that, you know, this is key considerations. What should I look out for? You know, kind of feels generic, kind of feels like it could be a little bit of everything on that job rec. And so what our goal today is, you know, with the time that we have left, is we're going to want to improve this output. And so, you know, this is going to be a key step for you to consider when you're looking at LLMs, like how do I go from something that's really, you know, generic to something that's really powerful and individualized. And I will say the most important thing here is to actually provide, you know, a framework or opinion in terms of how to actually approach this output. So for example, right now it's just asking, you know, let's see. It's saying, what should I prioritize and focus on? It's also saying, help me understand how I should think about evaluating if my candidate is a fit for the role. So it's very generic. It doesn't have like a specific opinion about how to approach this. What I will say is the way to improve this
is by providing it some structure and framework. So what we actually want to do, instead of just saying, okay, how should I think about this, is I want you to think about it, in a specific way. And we wanted to actually think about potential gaps first. So, you'll see that I had potential gaps over here and this other step. To get a more opinionated kind of framework, what we need to do is bring the potential gaps first and then help it go backwards and say, okay, based on these potential gaps, what are questions I should ask and what should I highlight? So instead of having this at the end, what we're going to do is we're just going to take out the gaps here. So we added potential gaps, but we actually wanted to think about potential gaps first before creating the questions that it'll ask. So I've already done this a little bit. I'm going to copy and paste kind of the new prompt that I would have used, just to show you the difference in the actual prompt and how just providing a little bit of structure and a little bit of opinion will actually get you a better output. So I also give it context, say today the date is blank, based on position I'm hiring for. This just helps understand, okay, the timing of everything. So let me copy and paste and just show you and go through this new prompt. All right, so I say, okay, evaluate, what should I prioritize and focus on? Check for any red flags. So these are things that we wanted to explicitly do. Do they have more than one stint of less than a year on the resume? If so, flag us, go deeper. Do they claim to have people management experience anywhere? Especially if it's a people management role. Are there large career breaks? So these are all things that we kind of just wanted to help narrow in and be more opinionated about. And then we also say, start with potential gaps. So this is going to give it the gaps up front. And then based on this, it's going to actually do a better job in terms of like what it's supposed to evaluate. I will also say that the header helps it, frame what to quote unquote think about a little bit better as well. So if you notice, before we had a header that was just like key considerations. And if you think about that, key considerations is really broad. And so it may or may not really understand what exactly you're trying to get it to output. Here I've changed it to what to evaluate. And I think it does a better job just giving that simple change in a header. And so we're going to take a look at the output and kind of just compare that. So yeah, it's going to give us potential gaps up front. And specifically, these are things that I called out in, what I'm looking for. So, when the user passes in something that they're looking for specifically, this will look at it. This is kind of funny. This is on deck, but it's like a fellowship. It probably could have done a better job here with short tenure. But yeah, so it's identifying potential gaps first, and then you'll see like what to evaluate. So given kind of like the specific gaps that we presented beforehand, it'll start to present like a better, framework. I will say some of these are definitely also still generic. So there's a little bit of work to do to kind of get out these generic, like, cultural fit. I guess that's fine. But it's probably not it depends on what we've provided to the prompt, but cool. So this is kind of like generally how I would go about changing, prompts to get better output that you're looking for. Again, you just need some small tweaks to give it, the proper order, if that makes sense, in terms of the framework in which it's supposed to think. So instead of just, kind of open-ended questions, kind of say, okay, like first think about this, the gaps, then think about, what to actually evaluate. And then lastly, think about the questions. And so that kind of order provides it a better framework to actually give you better output. And so when we go to interview questions and gaps, what you'll see is the previous step as if we're in a conversation. So step 16 is just that step that we ran with it and what to evaluate for. We're going to pass that as the output. And then we have this, which we now ask for interview questions based on those gaps. So what we're doing, the reason why I added another step here, we don't necessarily have to, but I will say that, the longer output that you need, you kind of need additional steps to get enough information, enough text from the output. So if you have, GPT-4 Turbo, it can generate a lot of text, but the longer you tell it to generate, it will start to become very sparse at certain points. So after, passing the previous step output, which is what we just passed, we say, okay, now, give me interview questions based on the roles. This is also something that, we would really want to rework because, it's kind of limited in the types of questions it's going to ask. It's only going to ask about the roles. However, what we really want to do is to also ask more unique questions. And so I'm going to update the template here shortly so that you guys can kind of see what types of additional questions would be helpful to ask, not just about, okay, like what did you do at your past role? However, we want to ask questions that are a little bit more, testing the interviewee to see whether or not, like, what would they do in certain situations and things of those nature, so that we can actually get a better grasp, not just about like, questions on previous roles. So that's a change that we would make here. I'm going to drop it in right now. However, I will say the best way to improve this is by actually just providing it frameworks. So instead of saying for each of these most recent roles, I would say, now I want you to ask, a mix of questions, both about roles as well as, scenario specific questions. And so we have a framework here that we're going to use, but we're running out of time. And so I'm going to just do this and update the template so you guys can see later, but would love to leave, any time for any questions.
Thanks, Cindy. You want to show us the Notion page that we...
Yes. The last step, I apologize. Didn't quite get here yet. So let's take a quick look here. Notion is extremely simple to set up. I'm going to go ahead and test this step really quickly, and give me 1 second as I pull up the Notion that we're going to publish to. Yeah, here we go. All right, so let's pull this. We have many Vinci interview guides. So it's executing. Let me just get out some of these questions. Again, this is the previous output. This template will be updated shortly here. Again, I like to run once just because you can go through the flow instead of testing all at one time every time. So generate that step. Now we're going to combine the output. We have 3 separate steps. We just want to put them all in the text. The text is exactly what it is, however, we just combine them together. Now we have the entire report put together. And for the integration step, it's actually fairly straightforward. You do need to integrate your account and click on the specific page that you want to publish to and save changes. I'm curious, I'll get back to you on how to actually do the emoji. This is something that I'll follow up on, but it is possible to also publish the emoji. So once we refresh, we should see a new one. Let's give it a second. Oh, there it came in. Okay, so this one here, we have multiple from previous tests, but this one is the one that we just generated. So you'll see that like the potential gaps come first. And it's a very simple integration, so I highly recommend checking out the Notion integration here. Any questions on that?
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Cindy, for the detailed demo. Don't think there's any more questions right now, but thank you so much for engaging with us. Some of the participants have been really active, and thank you so much for staying until the end. We do have a recording of this session that will be sent to you after this event ends. So keep an eye on your email if you want to take a look at the recording later. But we highly recommend that you try this out for yourself. Give the template a spin, but also try to build it out based on the steps that Cindy mentioned today. Thank you so much for sticking until the very end. We appreciate your time, and we'd love for you to respond to the feedback email that you will get after the event ends. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much, Cindy, for spending your time with us.
Thanks, y'all. Let me know if you have any questions and feel free to reach out in Slack.